Thank you all so much. It's great to be here. The last time I was here was 8 years ago this month at my retirement party from Miami-Dade College after 26 years of teaching here. Delighted to be back. And I think we ought to begin the story with the beginnings of Miami-Dade as Dade County Junior College in 1960. Among the founding fathers was Mitchell Wolfson, the Colonel, one of the wealthiest, finest self-made people in the community. He and his brother-in-law founded Wamecco in 1926. It became a theater chain that would have over 85 theaters by the 1980s. Seaquarium was under his wing, and many, many other things. First television station in the South was WTVJ, which opened in 1949. So he had a real interest in education. He felt like everybody should get an education. This was at a time when there weren't a lot of community colleges, and it was kind of hard for a lot of people to make it into a university. That's what Miami-Dade or Dade County Junior College represented to him, was this opportunity. And it succeeded very quickly, the college did. It was based, incidentally, its first 2 years at Miami Central High School, as well as some chicken coops, sides of auditoriums where classes were held and what have you, because its enrollment grew so quickly. And the Colonel, as everybody called him, got to thinking that, one of the things we need to do is open a downtown campus, in large measure because the northern part of downtown is decaying. Now, he had the Capitol Theater, which became the home of WTVJ in North Miami Avenue, a few blocks from here. He also had a lot of properties in the area, but he was also a very altruistic guy. And he kind of pushed this idea. And we have minutes of meetings of administrators in Miami-Dade going back to the mid-1960s that indicate that as they were planning the South Campus, today's Kendall campus, there was already talk about a downtown campus. So by the latter part of the 1960s, this thing's moving full speed. Colonel Wolfson's behind a lot of this. Where are you going to put it? Well, we're not sure where we're going to put it. This is an era when the federal government was paying monies, big monies, to clear what they called slums. And so Colonel Mitchell looked around and he said, this area where we are right now maybe would qualify for that. Initially, somebody had said, how about the block over here? Just a block away. And so the federal government looked at that, HUD looked at this in the late 60s and said, that's really a blighted area. It has to be a slum area for slum clearance, and we'll pay 2/3 of the cost of procuring that property, which would be a block. And so finally they decided on this area here by the end of the 1960s. Meantime, the campus opened in 1970 here, and it was a bunch of storefronts. There was a blood bank across the street. There was a really interesting building that was built in 1921, and an addition was made in 1925, called the Congress Building down on Northeast 2nd Avenue between about 2nd and 3rd Streets. And that really became the ex officio headquarters of Dade County Junior College at that time, pursuant to building this campus here. So you've got the land that's been singled out. You've got a lot of the financial support from the federal government, other monies being raised from other sources. You begin to level everything here by the beginning of the 1970s. School has started in 1970. Downtown, it was called the Downtown Campus. The enrollment far exceeded the projections, just as it did at all these Miami-Dade campuses as soon as they opened up. And again, there were storefronts. And it was a really dicey area here. See, downtown had been the center of everything in Miami from its birth in 1896 through the 1950s and well into the 1960s. When things began to get frayed, it was the northern edge. In other words, 3rd Street, 4th Street, 5th Street, 6th Street, as you're moving north from the Boulevard in. But a lot of that wasn't quite noticeable, say, in the early 1960s, mid-1960s. By the late 60s, it's very apparent. Colonel Wolfson saw that even earlier. And we got to do something to resuscitate this area. So that was his idea, his goal. So the land was cleared. We had some interesting buildings on the land. We had a famous Methodist church called the White Temple, named after a church of that same name in Colorado. We had the Pacific Building, sort of a Mediterranean-style office building built during the great real estate boom in the mid-1920s. All of this went down, so you had a completely cleared block. Groundbreaking for this building was in 1971. And the man who designed it, Hilario Candela, was a very accomplished architect, passed away not too many years ago. He designed, his most famous design is the Ralph Monroe Marine Stadium on Biscayne Bay, Virginia Key. So you had, a tremendous architect at the helm. You had Wolfson and the Board of Trustees. He was a member of the Board of Trustees. One of the big things that HUD said is, if you're going to build a college campus, you have to have parking. And it just so happened that Colonel Wilson was chair of the off-street parking authority, which is just located across the street, and that's where he would build that parking garage. And that was one of the things he needed to do to get that money to clear this whole lot and build the campus. So you have a campus coming on. So where are the instructors coming from? Many came from the North Campus. And they found themselves in this is wild over here, you know. And then students came, and the people that lived in the area or visited the area, they hadn't seen students here in a long time, and they kind of saw this as sort of unique. So it's a whole new, I think, mindset for a lot of people that are living in the area. And then, what are the classrooms? Well, there was one class that was held in the Everglades Hotel, at least briefly. There were classes in churches. There was an archaeology class that was down by the Miami River on the North Bank because there was an excavation there in 1974 and another one in 1977. The YMCAs, or the PE classes, were an old building that was built at the outset of the 1920s. So all over the area, you have this sort of resuscitation of buildings, at least for the time being, before you can build a permanent campus here. Ground is broken. The campus opens in 1973. The architect was interesting. He said, Candela, and I wanted to quote this for you. He said, I defined the campus as the entire downtown area, joining the existing social, cultural, recreational, intellectual, commercial, and other institutional facilities. I said, we must coordinate activities all over downtown instead of seeing the campus as an isolated square block. Now, somebody else also had an idea about downtown that I think was really in a symbiosis with what Candela had said, and that was the wonderful Ruth Greenfield, who passed away only a couple years ago. She was a musical prodigy. She studied under a master in Paris when she was young. She was teaching at the North Campus. She transferred over here when this new campus opened up. In fact, just before the new campus opened up. And she had a purpose also I wanted to share with you. Her father had been a merchant here as far back as the 1920s. And she remembered coming down to visit him. They lived over in Spring Garden. She'd come to visit him, and the place, downtown was the center of everything. You had, at its peak in the mid-1950s, 9 movie theaters day and night operating. You had churches. You had a synagogue. You had schools. You had the biggest businesses. Everybody knows about Burdines, obviously. You had your doctor. You had your attorney. You had the courts. Everything was here. And she said, we just can't let this go like this. So, and it's going to explain what she's going to be doing. She said, we wanted to keep people downtown and bring them back to the city to enrich the cultural life of the community. Now, so what did she do? Well, she came in 72, and she instituted something called the Lunchtown Lively Arts Series, which were local performers initially, and later on you'd find internationally known performers who might come and do this. They perform free at lunchtime once a week, beginning on the courthouse steps at 73 West Flagler Street. And to kick it off in 1972, she organized a parade that went from this campus. And again, this building wasn't open until 73, so it was all these makeshift stores and what have you, just across the street in particular. And they just marched down diagonally down to the courthouse. 500 plus performances took place between 1972 and 1987 under the guise of the Lunchtown Lively Arts Series, headed by Ruth Greenfield. So it really kind of rekindled the idea, hey, this can be a lively place after all. Maybe this isn't too bad of a place to be. So you've got things going on with some very creative administrators, very creative teachers that are in this area. Meantime, Mitchell Wolfson never stops coming over here. He was ambling through here before this building opened, walking past a couple buildings that were being used temporarily as offices and as classrooms. And one of the college officials with him said this would be a great place for kids to have some picnic tables, sit around, have lunch, be able to talk, what have you. A day later, he came by with a check, gave it to the college, and said, let's buy that stuff for the kids, put it right over here. So that was Wolfson. In fact, when he passed away, his foundation, which continues to so generously support this campus and other campuses and other programs in the college, his foundation would devote about 80% of scores of millions of dollars to Miami-Dade College, with emphasis on education and training as opposed to buildings or whatever. So you've got Wolfson as a lifetime supporter. He lived until the early 1980s. So the campus is going on strong, and the projections for enrollment have exceeded it in some cases by 75, 80%. We need more room. And so we're having classes in churches. having classes in other schools, wherever we could find a place for it. And there was a real push to get a building too, and it took forever to get that. And finally, ground was broken for that in the early 1980s. It opened up in the early to mid-1980s, so you had a second building. But meantime, you've resuscitated so many great buildings in the area that you're now using, or we're using for classes. And they've come alive again for the first time, in many cases, since the immediate period after World War II. Now they're being used once more. Real important. In fact, the college, in the process of doing that, became what I think is the foremost steward of historic buildings in Miami. Had the Tower Theater for 20 years, have the Dyer building today. It just goes on and on and on. The Miami News Freedom Tower, the Quebec Center, it just goes on throughout this whole area. Some of the buildings that the college has embraced and taken care of. The money they spent on the tower alone just to keep it up for 20 years is amazing. So you've got the downtown campus, it's open, it's beginning to expand. Many events are taking place here. It's drawn people who would never come down here otherwise, to musicals, to performances of different kinds. Becomes a very popular place for a lot of people. And in the 1980s, Dr. Eduardo Padron, who had gone to Miami-Dade as a young person before going to the University of Florida, he becomes president of this campus. And he was a downtowner. And he wanted this campus to be really a staging ground for a lot of different activities, more so than ever before. And so you have the Miami International Book Fair, 1984 opens here. In later years, 500,000 to 750,000 people would attend book fair over a course of a long weekend. It becomes the place to be in November each year. How about the Paella 84 Festival? Kathy Sigler, who worked with him as an administrator, Dr. Sigler, on this campus, she was over in Spain and she saw this huge paella festival. Now, you really have to go to Valencia, Spain to have real paella. I know that firsthand. My wife's from there, and I've dined on that paella there. Well, she went by there, and she said, why can't we have a big paella festival here? She actually got the chef who promoted it over there, brought him over here for this festival as part of Hispanic Heritage Month. That began in 1984. That went on for several years. So more and more people are getting a sense of this campus. Metro Hoover begins operating in 1986. At that point, it only circled downtown. It didn't have the extensions. There were 2 stops at this campus, which really gave it a certain cachet. So bigger things are happening. More people are coming around. There's still not a lot of private investment in the area, which Colonel Wilson, who at this point was deceased, would have said was really important for the area. But by the turn of the new century, the 21st century, the investment comes. And the area's gone absolutely crazy. I wouldn't know where to begin. I was sitting over in the president's conference room prior to coming out here, and the high-rise is going up all around here. It's just amazing. In fact, the city of Miami has the 3rd densest skyline in the United States today. That's how much it's growing. And most of that growth has been in this area, points north and, of course, into the Brickell Avenue neighborhood. How about Miami World Center, this project that's just north of here? Who would have imagined in an area like that was challenged, you'd have something like that? So this wonderful campus, in many ways, directly and indirectly, has been responsible for really bringing that dream alive on the part of Colonel Mitchell Wilson. That is, resuscitate the northern parts of downtown Miami and bring in just a whole new area that people can enjoy, become involved with. Thank you.